Hello and welcome to this SBC webinar, which is called Does Player Education Offer the Biggest Potential to Improve Safer Gambling Provision? Which is brought to you by us, SBC, in partnership with our friends at 1xBet. Now, we're going to be discussing some of the findings of an operator survey that we've run, which was used for the fourth report in the International Player Safety Index project. I'm Martin Elliott, Media Director for SBC, and I'm delighted to say I'm joined by people who know a lot more about this topic than I do, who I'm going to now ask to briefly introduce themselves. Peter, let's start with you.
Very nice to meet everyone. Peter Marcus. I have been in the online gaming industry for over 25 years. Former COO of William Hill Online, Group Operations Director for Entain, UK MD for Betfair. And my speciality in the last few years has been how to operationalize responsible gaming, regulations, safer gambling, to commercialize and operationalize it for big multi-global corporates.
Brilliant, and thanks for joining us as always, Peter. And Simon.
Hi everyone. Thanks for that, Martin. I think we're learning together with these reports. It's very kind of you to say that I know more than you, but I think actually the purpose of these reports was so we all learn together. Very kind and cuddly and friendly of me this morning. So Simon Westbury, currently a strategic advisor at 1xBet. Been in the industry not quite as long as Peter. I think it's 18 or 19 years. Worked mainly on the B2B side before stepping onto the B2C side about this time last year.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Simon. And last but by no means least, Alan.
Thanks, Martin. Hi, everyone. My name is Alan Houston, and I'm a partner in McCann Fitzgerald here in Ireland. It's the leading commercial law firm in Ireland, and I'm a partner and head of the betting and gaming group here.
Yeah, that's right. And I'm going to stay with you to start with, actually, Alan, because Ireland offers a really good starting point for this kind of discussion, because very recently has sort of agreed on some new regulations at government level, and that's now being rolled out. So theoretically, you have a bit of a blank canvas in the Irish market to really do the right thing around player protection and player education and so on. I'm perhaps emphasizing the word theoretically here, because we all know there can be difficulties taking sort of well-intentioned regulation and putting it into practice. So I wonder if you could just start by telling us a little bit about the situation in Ireland as the regulation begins to be implemented, and what sort of player education requirements there are in the new regulations.
Yeah, thanks, Martin. Yeah, as you mentioned, Ireland is really in its infancy in terms of kind of putting in place a new modern kind of regulatory regime. And I think it's kind of fair to say we've gone from a place historically where we had kind of very little fit for purpose regulation to now having probably the newest kind of regulatory act and kind of regulator in the European Union. The act itself, the Gambling Regulation Act, was just enacted in 2024, and we're now going through the place where we're kind of in 2025 setting up the office of the regulator, with the first licenses due to be issued at the end of June this year, where B2C betting licenses will be issued. I suppose in terms of the act itself, it's really, the way I look at it, it's been framed as a public health measure, which is, I suppose, somewhat unusual in the context of legislation of this nature. But I suppose by virtue of being a public health measure, I suppose you won't be surprised to hear that there are, quite significant provisions in there in terms of, I suppose, ensuring that kind of consumers are protected, because that is kind of goes to the core of the legislation. I think the Act itself probably provides the bones, and then the meat that's going to go on those bones will come in the form of regulation. And we do not have kind of all of those regulations yet as the regulator is getting up to speed. But I think it is fair to say when you look at, say, things like player safety and consumer protection, one of the things that is enshrined in the Act itself is there are kind of quite kind of detailed provisions around kind of player education. And I think where you see those kind of coming through is there are sections in the Act which will put fairly detailed obligations on operators to provide various information to consumers, and that can go from information in relation to, you know, the characteristics of excessive or compulsive gambling, to facilities that will support consumers in identifying, I suppose, the characteristics of excessive and compulsive gambling, information on how to block and avoid kind of any issues that might lead you into kind of problem gambling, and then obviously, say, information in relation to the type of sports that are available. That goes to the information, and then, you know, there are tools provided then as well in terms of the regulator can prescribe, I suppose, intervals in terms of details on, the amount that a player has staked in a period, or that the amount that they've lost. And then even to advertising, again, the regulator can prescribe information that has to be contained in advertising. And then that, again, that goes to, you know, information in relation to levels in terms of excessive or problem gambling, or research on the area. So I think what we are, there's certainly the mechanisms are in the Act. And I suppose what we're waiting for at the moment is maybe to see some more detail in terms of the regulations that the regulator will kind of produce, which put the actual specific obligations on operators.
Sure. Well, thanks for that, Alan. That's very interesting to see how they're doing things in Ireland. Peter, you've worked in numerous markets around the world. What listening to Alan there, what do you think of that Irish model, and do you have an inkling what we might expect from the regulator when they start putting the sort of practical steps in place?
I think there's a few things that I'd watch for. Look, all that regulation sounds sensible, right? I don't think any operator, even a non-sensible operator, any operator wants to have problem gamblers gambling with them, because guess what? They blow up and they charge back and they cause bad press and they harm themselves. Just take away the commercial side, they also harm themselves in ways. So I don't think there's no one out there, there's this viewpoint that, you know, we all want problem gamblers scam as much as they can. I've never seen that in my many years in this industry with many companies, including smaller operators in grey markets, etc. But it's how do you deal with them? And I think, you know, so what Alan's saying is sensible, absolutely sensible. I think what fears me is they'll do one of two things. They'll all either demand that everyone puts lots of pages and pages and pages of information in. Well, I'll give you pages that no customer's ever read in their entire lives. When you put Google Analytics on it, no one opens it. And I'm very good at hiding pages I don't want customers to see. I really am. That only regulators will look at. That's one risk on one side of the equation. And the risk on the other side is that you have pop-ups every 2 minutes saying you've wagered this amount of money. And the truth is the customer doesn't understand the word wager. Wager's not lost. It's not deposited. It's wagered. And it goes up and down. So you've got to get a balance. And it's really, what is it that helps a customer to make informed, sensible decisions? That's what the regulators should be looking at. I've not seen one do that yet, by the way, anywhere in the world. But if they could only work out how to help the customers make informed decisions, and that is about understanding that what they're losing, what they're depositing, how long they're spending, some of the signs we all look for, and we all got that on our markers of harm. But understanding that, having a dashboard page, for example, that actually tells you that you can go and look at yourself, that's true education. And then from that education, you can help them down the line. If they go too far, you've got your markers of harm to push them down the line. That would be a really sensible way of doing it. Unfortunately, in most regulations, they go one extreme or the other. They don't come to something that actually helps the customers and makes a decent business as well. And you can do both. It does exist.
Sure. I mean, that's an interesting point. We're going to get back, I think, a little bit later on to some of those points, Peter, particularly around sort of the form information should take and when it's delivered and so on. But Simon, just briefly to wrap up on Ireland, it is one of the markets 1xBet has is licensed in and is live in. What's your impression of what you've seen of the regulation so far and what you've heard from Alan and Peter?
I think, as Peter said, what Alan says on paper makes sense. I'm always a bit nervous when a regulatory review, or however we want to call it, the evolution of the regulated market is bracketed as a public health initiative. Gambling is entertainment, but I understand why. I think we're facing the normal challenge. What may make sense on paper as an act of parliament, government, you're asking them regulators, and I'm not going to mention the Irish regulator here, but I saw an advert the other day, or someone commented on LinkedIn about the UKGC was looking for a head of, offshore gambling, whatever it was, to look at the offshore, and they're offering 65k. I think what you're finding is governments give acts to regulators. Regulators may not be versed or understanding of gambling. They're civil servants, and then trying to apply something that they may not fully understand. And I think that's where you have to get the balance, and we probably don't, between what Peter says, hiding of pages, and common sense, informed decisions such as dashboards. I think Ireland will be interesting, as we say. It's a new market, or not a new market, but a evolving market with a new regulatory environment coming. But I think this thing about a player making an informed decision is also very important. I think, Peter mentioned wages, but if you ask the casual player how many of the terms that we use every day, or acronyms such as RTP, RNG, volatility, do they actually understand? I wouldn't want to put it out there. I don't want to make a guess, but I would suggest just seeing my friends in the pubs in the UK having a gamble. They're not fully averse with even looking at a fruit machine when it says 74% RTP. They don't know what it means. So I think there's a lot of work to be done. I think let's see what comes out. But I think we're in the same situation. The government's giving an act for a regulator that may not fully understand gambling or how to apply the act in a sensible way.
Yeah.
Martin, can I add one more thing about Ireland? I'm not sure it's good or bad, but I'm trying to think of another market out there that is going to regulate new regulation, but actually is so open already and so knowledgeable about gambling already. TV stations show gambling ads from the UK or from Ireland the entire time. There's plenty of shops on the high street. I don't think this is going to grab a whole load of new punters into the market. I mean, Alan may disagree there, but I think it's a very mature market, Ireland. And I think the government and the regulator have to understand that when they're doing it. The risk is they're going to try and regulate something as if it's brand new, which is utterly not brand new. And it's very mature, and the customers get it and understand what's going on. That's another risk, going back to Simon's comment about the 65k from the UK Gambling Commission. I'd love to know what the salaries are for the Gambling Commission in Ireland, but the risk is that they're going to be much lower than any of the operators, and therefore you won't get people who understand this industry very well at all.
No, I think that's always an interesting point, that you see a lot of people who've previously worked for the regulator working at a regulator now working at operators, not so much the other way around though. So there's definitely something in that.
That's true, Martin. I remember me and Peter did a panel, was it one of these in November, Peter, when you actually said when will be the first person to go from the operator or our side of the industry into the regulator. It may be career ending, which is why no one's done it. But
yeah, I think so. So I wonder a little bit, just perhaps sticking with you, Simon, as well. We're talking here about bringing in new regulations and so on as well, but we're also talking a bit about from our point of view, the benefits of education and so on. Do you think there is some kind of tipping point where we'll be able to say that actually educating the players is more important and more effective than actually going away and ticking the boxes to fill out the forms that you send back to the regulators to show you've complied with every sort of clause in the regulation?
I think that's where theory and reality sometimes separate. I think, look, as you indicate, we have to move from maybe performative compliance or player protection or whatever you want to call it to a genuine commitment from the industry. And I'm not here to quote numbers, and we have to look at this, from the reports region by region. In Africa and LATAM, the operators were saying that gambling is viewed as income generation, so that's a very low point where you've got to start your education from. If you're looking at other markets, there's other challenges. From the report and what I read, 84% of the operator respondents said that player protection was the foundation of player education. Was the foundation of player safety, but 67% of players were apathetic to actual engaging. But actually, if you look at this, and I think I don't know how to bracket this sensibly, so I'm just going to say it. 69% of the operators that responded saying those players that gamble safely or sensibly are more profitable in the long run. But then they're juxtaposing that with 49% of them said that commercial considerations were a blocker to player safety. So I think I'm going to kind of rewind the question and say, this is where, as an industry, we maybe need to educate ourselves and bring in player protection from the conception of anything that we do, be that product. I think people view player protection in the industry as losing money. It doesn't have to be, as I said. We understand those who gamble safely are actually more profitable in the long run. So I think, as an industry, the slot developers, whatever you want to call it, the guys using AI and stuff, I don't understand. When the product developers, product managers first get a product brief or a product concept, they have to evolve the player at the end point. And part of that isn't just profitability, it's about player protection and also education. No one wants player education to be clinical, which is why I quite like Peter's idea of the dashboard. When I was at SBC Malta, Betson were talking about a sports star, and you get certain levels of protective clothing as part of this player protection. It's not clinical. As I've said before, no one likes going to the doctor. But I think, moving from the point of governments to regulators, before we start trying to educate the player effectively, I think we need to have a look at ourselves as an industry and ingrain player protection in everything we do, rather than just ticking boxes, as you indicated.
Sure. I guess there's a bit of a piece for operators and suppliers to do in terms of staff education as well, for them to be able to really effectively do the education, for the staff to effectively do the education piece and the protection piece with customers as well.
Of course. And I think, as an operator, we have the responsibility to engage with the customer at the end point. But ultimately, we are buying products, as you've mentioned, from suppliers to us. Now, how much oversight do we have on the player education protection or put into the maths? But we don't. So I think, actually, the suppliers, it starts with the suppliers as well as the operators. It's not just an operator-led initiative.
No, sure, I agree with that. And Alan, just briefly, because you'll have seen some, I'm sure, some feedback from the regulator when operators perhaps haven't quite got things right. Is focusing on education first, does that give the operator a bit of a problem in terms of being able to report back things to the regulator? We've done X, Y, Z, which is not necessarily tangible in the way that some of the other compliance requirements are.
Yeah, well, I think it's, say, if you take, say, the Irish Act alone, there are requirements in there to do with even like staff trainings. Anyone that's kind of got a point of contact with kind of consumers, they will have to have done specific kind of staff training courses around kind of again, back into identifying problems. But I think that the thing that jumped out for me in the report is that this is probably a three-way. Player protection is a three-way street, combining, I suppose, the role of the regulator, the operator, and also the customer. I think kind of giving consumers, I suppose, further information to be able to identify where kind of problems or what might be regarded as kind of signs of problems is important. But I think one of the points that is flagged in the report as well is that, look, we also have to take account to the fact that, look, if you are dealing with a consumer who has a problem or who has got to the stage that they have a problem, then those flags are not really going to be kind of maybe as helpful to them, because their judgment is going to be impaired. So that's where I think the responsibility comes with the operator and the regulators to have other tools, I suppose, for stepping in, and education is just one part of kind of player protection, and I think it's an important part, but kind of have to take account of the fact that we do need other kind of protections in there as well.
Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, I think it's very complex to build a system that works for and messaging that works for the 99% of people who can gamble within normal sort of levels and see it as entertainment and enjoy it, and then also works for really at the extreme the most serious sort of gambling disorders as well. How do you balance those two things? It's a very difficult job for both sort of compliance teams, for marketing teams, and so on to get that messaging right, isn't it? I think.
I don't think so. I actually don't think so. Look, we have said it before, but we're really good at doing CRM and getting people to deposit more money. And it's not compliance. Compliance's job is not to message customers. Compliance are semi-paralegals. That's their thought process. They're not marketeers. They're legally trained compliance people to the most extent. They need to deal with the most dangerous, the most risky things, 100%. But education should come under marketing. In the same way they educate how to give a bonus out or educate how to play a game, educate how to gamble responsibly, educate customers to educate themselves how much they've lost, how much they spent, what they want to spend, using the right tools. We teach people to use all these wonderful loyalty tools and gamification. Why not do the same as safer gambling? So I don't buy that. And I look at the drinks industry, who 20 years ago was saying the same thing, and they were forced to do a blooming good job, by the way, in Ireland and in UK and in other markets, forced to do a really good job at education and management of customers and drinking, be it drink driving or drink too much. I always use the example of where you go to a pub on a Friday night, and I've drunk too many drinks. You really wish the landlord would say, enough, go home, come back tomorrow. I don't want to ban me, self-exclude me, call me a pariah, call the police on me, like we tend to do in our industry. We go to extremes, nothing to everything. There's so much in the middle. And why doesn't that happen? I don't think it's actually got to do with revenue. I don't think you lose revenue from gambling. It's very frustrating when loads of people self-exclude and full well they're not a problem gambler, by the way. They're trying to get more bonuses from you or just close their site or God knows why they do it. But so, some of the tools we have actually go use against us to some extent. If you do true problem gambling, it's not a cost to the business at all. In fact, it's the opposite. The reason we do it, I think, is because there's extremes in regulation which gets in the way of education in many, many markets. And my proof of that is the sweepstake market in the USA, which is not regulated at all, but a massive market. All of them have safer gambling measures. All of them have self-exclusion. All of them have deposit limits. Yet there's no legal obligation whatsoever to offer it. So the industry wants to do it. But when they do it their own way, if they're sensible, if they're mature, if they're a public company, I always remember being told, you really don't want to get into the Daily Mail, do you? Be sensible by a regulator. It's probably the best advice I ever got as an operator, because you make really sensible decisions.
I think that's maybe for the industry, Peter. Someone wants to be in the Daily Mail. I mean, I think what the guys are saying is very encouraging. I mean, a player needs to they're over 18, they're adults at the end of the day. They do need to take some responsibility themselves. But I think as an industry, because of how we've behaved historically, we're on a bit of a hiding to nothing. As you say, Martin, we can provide entertainment to 99% of people, but one mistake from us, and it doesn't even have to be about player protection. I'm reading all about, I think it's William Hill paid it. There was a glitch in the system and a jackpot went mental, and then everyone's upset that they're not getting their money. Now, there's ways that could have maybe been handled better, but actually, because we work in the industry, we're fully aware of the T's and C's that relate to that. And I think as an industry, and I've said this before, so forgive me for repeating with it. We've lost the discussion, I won't say argument, with society where governments just view us, I would say, under maybe the guise of regulation as a tax cash cow, and they don't get in trouble for raising tax on us ever. They may not understand the implications of that right now, when we may say that in the future. But I think as an industry, being on a hiding to nothing and being picked up on that 1% all the time is a challenge that we need to overcome before we can change that public perception. But I think on the tools, as Alan and Peter were talking, it was interesting, the report that mentioned that, unsurprisingly, self-assessment were the worst received tools, but things like deposit limits, loss limits, exclusion and player breaks worked well, and players understood those tools. So I think, as always, there's no correct answer to this, really.
Because self-assessment's not a safer gambling tool. It's an affordability tool used by the government to try and control you. That's why. It's just not a self-assessment tool. The instance that I always do is, whenever you do market research on this stuff, and you saw it in the report, actually, I think it's really good, but I don't need it. It's a normal answer you get from customers.
Yeah.
And customers understand they can use it. It's a problem gambler to use it. That's where education comes in. But don't confuse KYC, AML, affordability, and safer gambling. They're completely different things. And when they get confused, customers get really peeved off, and so do operators. I don't think any operator should be in the game who isn't prepared to education, real education, not just messages, but real education on the dangers of excessive gambling and the enjoyment of non-excessive gambling. Every operator should be doing that. It's just part of the job of this business, and they don't want to do it. They shouldn't. I don't care if they're black market, white market, regulated in any country. They need to be doing that. And Simon mentioned Africa. There are some really good companies in Africa that are doing some of that stuff now to try and get people to realise you shouldn't be coming in and doing a really expensive acca with half your salary to try and make money. It's not a lottery. You're not going to win. So yeah, the chance of winning, though, there's some really good companies doing that now because it's the right thing to do. It's just the right thing to do. And most of our industry actually do the right thing. No matter what we get accused of doing publicly, most of the industry do the right thing. I really believe it.
Yeah, well, I would agree there, Peter, because my background before coming to work at SBC was working in journalism in a more mainstream journalism job, and I was really pleasantly surprised to see the efforts that what actually goes on in the industry, the efforts on player education, player safety, and so on. That it's so different to what you would believe from reading the output of some of my previous employers. So yeah, it's a losing thing.
I think everyone's now Googling you, Martin, to see what you've written, where you've written it, and where you worked before, maybe on LinkedIn.
Yeah,
as long as it's not Daily Mail.
It may have been an associated company with the Daily Mail, but not with the Mail, the one downstairs in the office. But there we go. Yeah, I mean, strangely, one of the things we asked operators as part of this was what is stopping you having a sort of higher quality player education? What is hindering the efforts? And yeah, negative press coverage was 32% of people, operators said that was a problem in doing that. And I guess
that doesn't really make any sense. Because of bad press, you don't want to educate your players so this stuff doesn't happen again.
I think it's a little bit because there are certain journalists on national newspapers who I could probably name, but
I think I may know them, Martin, to be fair,
who regard anything positive about the gambling industry as terrible whitewash of the evils that that they perceive it does. So it is difficult to stick your head above the parapet. I think sometimes from a PR point of view, I can understand that. But there are some other answers in that. Let's see, 27% of people said industry apathy was a problem. 29% of people said the regulations themselves prevented having better education provision, which I think we'll come back to in a minute, because that's an interesting point. Similarly, 29% said government policies, which are very
same thing.
Yeah, I think it is. 48% of people said commercial considerations, but then by far
I got it as 49, Martin, when I read the report. Maybe I'm out by one.
That's right. Maybe I can't read my own writing. That's the other point here.
No comment.
Yeah. And then, but by far the biggest result there, 67% of the respondents said it was actually a lack of interest from players in player safety and in reading those sort of responsible gambling messages. And as a punter, I sort of understand that. I'm not sure I want to be lectured when I want to put a bet on the 3:30 at Haydock. I feel in my own mind, nothing's ever going to go wrong for me. Is that I don't need this. So I do understand why some players might not be interested in it. So is there a way around that, we think? I mean, I love the idea of the dashboard and so on. That would data that tells me exactly how much I've lost or won would be really interesting. I mean, what do you think, Peter? Is there a way of players?
As you say this, I'm thinking. I had lunch half an hour ago, and on the menu it had every calorie.
Yeah,
and I hate it. It makes me feel so awful. I hate it. And it tells you how bad every single thing you want to order. You want to go to a meal, you want to have a nice meal, not be told how bad it is for you. But it also helps me make decisions subtly on what I buy. And I don't think I bought the double cheesecake since I've seen those calories on there. And I think there's something in there about that. So it's about subtle marketing. It's about, again, if we said, deposit now and get 100% so you can lose all your money to us and we'll be very rich, you're not going to get many customers come to your site. So why do we do that in safer gambling? Oh, don't do that. It's so dangerous for you. It's another marketing tool. In the same way that you get bonuses, you also get safer gambling. And there are subtle ways of doing it, really good, subtle ways of doing it. And I think that's where we can put our efforts into. But I also think that comment about regulation is not a million miles off the truth, because regulators don't trust the industry. It's not just journalists. Regulators and politicians do not trust the industry. They're happy to take the tax, but I can't think of one regulator in the world, apart from the global ones like Malta and Gibraltar and Northern and stuff like that, who actually trust the industry. So let's start with trust. These are big public companies on the whole, or big private companies, but big companies on the whole. They do believe in ESG. They do believe in this stuff. Start with that. Work together on this stuff. I always look at people like Epic and then Gambling with Lives. And they had exactly the same experience, both founders. Yet Gambling with Lives wants to do everything to destroy the industry. And I get that. I get that what happened to their son. I get it completely. And Epic wants everything to help the industry to educate. And I love working with Epic. They give you the best ideas in the absolute world because they come from that area. And if we did that right, this is not costing us. There is no way any of this stuff will cost us. And the 43.6% honestly are wrong. They're bluntly wrong. This does not cost revenue if you do it well and properly. You protect your customers like you protect your customers from everything else you do, because you actually want to keep your customers. So protect them.
Sure. I mean, I think it is. You can frame this in many ways, and one of it is basic customer care, customer service, isn't it? In any industry, to retain your customer, you have to look after them, treat them well.
Yeah.
So it's.
McDonald's put salad on the menu on purpose, right? Sorry, Alan.
Yeah, I was going to just say, isn't it about as well, I suppose, ensuring the customers have the ability to make informed judgments for themselves? So, it's back to that point. To me, that the purpose of the regulator is to set the rules, and which the operators have to comply with. But equally, in terms of kind of protecting consumers, I suppose one of the limbs of that has to be providing kind of information that customers whose judgment isn't impaired, because they're not in they're not suffering, say, from problem, but they can make an informed judgment about, okay, I didn't realize that, if I drink 6 pints of alcohol, that's above the, whatever limit. Again, it's just the kind of that same, the triggers or the dashboard that kind of flash, indicators. It doesn't necessarily say you have a problem, but it's just an indicator of something to be aware of.
I think that's a good point, especially around alcohol. When you're talking about, in the UK, it's like 1 glass of wine or 2 large glasses takes you over the limit, but it's not the same for everyone because everyone's different. So I think actually you have to understand everyone's an individual. Martin Elliott may be putting his bets on in Haymarket or whenever at the 3:30 every week, and there may be a point that you can be educated about it subtly. You're obviously not in a bracket of going to depend on how much you're gambling, Martin, of course. But it's to me, it's about subtle and non-intrusive messaging and education, and I think Peter says it's under marketing 100%. But I think even if we roll back and look at other reports in this series, there's many regulatory environments that are evolving where there's no protection, stipulation, and regulation, and it's left to the operator. So I think there's many different examples globally that we have to look at, but I think as Peter says, most, if not all, companies in this space are big, and especially in the regulatory environment, want to educate the player because, as I touched on at the beginning, 69% of operators who responded to this says those players who gamble safely in the long term are more profitable.
And Simon, Peter, can I ask a question? Obviously, one of the things that we have in Ireland, similar in the UK, is there is going to be a social impact fund, which is made up of contributions from operators. That fund can be used for for different purposes, but one of them is to fund kind of education of the public. So in your experience, what would you like to see, I suppose, say a regulator using some of that social impact fund for in terms of kind of education for the public?
Can I say what I'd like not to do?
Yeah.
It's not to go to universities and then anti-gambling bias to do research to prove that gambling's bad, which is the big conversation going in the UK now with the fund. Because if you look at who's getting it, even now, it's going to people with absolute biases against gambling. It shouldn't be going there. It shouldn't be going to sort of throw us in your face campaigns about gambling's not good and we gamble carefully. The one glass of wine a week is a silly comment because everyone drinks more than one glass of wine a week. So everyone just ignores it. What it should be going to are consulting companies that are carefully vetted to help, Epic's example, there are others out there as well, to help formulate policy and help formulate marketing. It could go to joint marketing campaigns. I really want to see a self-exclusion system where you have to self-exclude across all operators. I for the life of me don't understand how you can possibly be a problem gambler on Ladbrokes but not on William Hill. You're either a problem gambler, you're not a problem gambler. You can't be one or the other. That's where I'd like to see it going. The problem with these funds is they tend to go to the most extreme elements, and then it just becomes a fight. Also, the thing that gets me, that they charge enough tax here. Surely some of that money can go to it. By the way, I'll tell you where I really wanted to go. I wanted to help people. I wanted to go to the health authorities to actually help people that have got that problem. I don't want one serious gambling addict not to have a residential space to be able to protect themselves. I would love to see the money going to that. Because that's where it should be going. In the same way that alcohol money, alcohol tax will go to look after people who've got serious liver damage. The very small percentage of people get liver damage. I'd love to see that. I want to see people who are really hurt by gambling helped as much as possible. That's where I'd like to see this going to. But I know where it's going to go. It's going to go to research, university research, which is inherently anti-gambling, to try and get more rules put in. And more laws put in, and more public health, and you'll end up with €100 a customer rules put in the next 2-3 years. It will ruin the whole industry. Black market comes up, and you've achieved nothing. That's what's going to happen, Alan, I'm afraid. But that's what it shouldn't happen. That's what's going to happen because we've seen it in every other market. Ireland's not been no different. Particularly it's a public health issue, which is not a great thing to be, by the way. It's not gambling's not a public health issue. Gambling creates in a tiny, small proportion of customers a public health issue. But I saw a stat a few months ago that shopping, 5% of all online shoppers are problem shoppers. You take the same definition as problem gambling is 0.3% in the UK. Go and do something shopping for public health, and get Amazon to have a public health regulation. They wouldn't do it, or eBay. So, there's my rant over.
Okay. It's interesting. I mean, there are many announcements around this at the moment. Including there's just one this morning actually about, and I if you haven't seen it, Pete, I'm not going to tell you what it is because you might. It fits into your description of where it shouldn't go, I think. But still, one of the things it came out in the report, I think, was generally. Operators are a little bit worried that players don't understand what positive play means. And also, only 35% of the operators we talked to agreed with the idea that players understood that gambling is entertainment and not a way to finance their lifestyle. So I think those things taken together broadly sort of build a case that players need to be a little bit better informed around things. So I'm just wondering if we could spend, because we're coming towards the end now, if we could look at perhaps some of the ways in which that education could be improved, what the things to focus are on. I think, Peter, you've already touched on one or two things around. A lot of it at the moment is intervention rather than giving people the facts up front so they can make their own decision. It's intervention when they've done something that indicates they're going in the wrong direction on that. So I think that is definitely one thing. But I don't know, Simon, you touched on this a little bit earlier as well. When I first crossed the threshold of a turf accountant on the high street, the number of options you could have a bet on were relatively rare, were relatively small. You know, if somebody was to go to the counter and have a Heinz, say, they'd get a little nod of approval from the other punters in there as you were some expert. But now there are thousands of different things. There are all these different games, different bet types, and so on. Do you think the starting point is actually to inform players what they're betting on a bit more?
I think that yes, in a nutshell. I mean, I remember about 8 years ago now, there was an Anthony Joshua fight, and my mate was like, I want to put a bet on it. I don't know how to do it. And he was betting shops are quite intimidating places. Obviously, being online, that kind of removes that aspect. But I think when you're looking at this as a challenge, yeah, you need to educate the player, but you also don't want to overwhelm the player. You need to understand. And we talk about this cross-selling sports to casino or whatever. If a casino player is a casino player, they don't need to understand sports betting unless they want to go into that space. So I think it needs to be informed and targeted and not just a brushstroke across everything. You need to know everything, because I think most people in the industry themselves wouldn't understand every terminology that we use or everything that we do. So I wouldn't venture that I do either. But I think in terms of answering that question, there's many options out there, but you need to everything starts from a base. You know what I mean? If it's a slot machine or a sports, but everything has a base, and you need to educate the player about what they're becoming involved in. But I think, as we've discussed through this call, it can't be intrusive and it can't be overbearing, because actually then you're just pushing customers away in the short to long term. So I think you have to start with education, and you've mentioned positive player, and I understand positive play around literacy, control, honesty, and all that. But for me, I prefer safe play, and I don't know if that's just me coming up with crazy ideas in my office, but safe play is just, to me, a little bit positive. Obviously, you want your customers to have a positive experience, but you want them to also have a safe experience. And I think I've always talked about communication, clarity, and consistency, and I think that was more between the regulatory, the operator, and the governments. But actually, I think it also needs to come across the industry, as Peter said. You can't be self-excluding from one website and then be able to just open another tab and go onto that, whatever website that may be. So I think that there's tools that we've developed in 1xBet, as we've discussed previously with 1x Balance, and it's kind of leading towards Peter's idea of dashboard, to be fair. I might take it a little bit further. Thank you, Peter. Don't charge me royalties. But yeah, it all starts with education, but it comes with targeted, sensible education. And I think it even comes down to Peter was saying, which I'm glad I didn't have to follow his answer, although Alan asked me that question as well, but Peter answered it perfectly. But for me, it needs to be balanced and it needs to be frontline. As Peter says, no one wants to see anyone with a problem in anything. So any money that's given or any education that's given needs to be balanced, and it needs to be given to those on the front line that can really make a difference.
Yeah. Okay. So, and Alan, I think one thing I find confusing as a player a little bit is just around terms and conditions sometimes. I think we've touched on a little bit a recent incident where a lot of players were told they'd had huge wins, and it turns out they hadn't had huge wins, and there'd been a lot of publicity about that. But even things like terms and conditions around bonuses and so on, do you think there's space to do something there, so to help players be that little bit better informed, make wiser decisions about the bonuses and the bonuses they use, the games they play, and so on.
Yeah, I think it is really important from a consumer protection perspective that, say, if you're offering bonuses, that the terms and conditions of the bonuses are clear. So, and is it a kind of a straight one-off bonus that you play it and then you can you can take the winnings, or if there's requirements around churning, that is a very different kind of bonus. So I think the thing with any bonus is that it has to be very clear in terms of what are the conditions that are attaching it from a consumer perspective, because I certainly have seen myself when I've kind of put on bets or that they are kind of, some of the bonusing is very complex, and trying to understand it, I think that the industry at times can do better in terms of making clear what are the requirements attaching to them.
Sure. I think that's right. It is a difficult area, and
Martin, can I give the counter argument a second? Because I get where Alan's coming from. What Alan says makes absolute sense. But as someone who's probably written thousands of terms and conditions of bonuses over his lifetime, bonus abusers, and they are bonus abusers. They're not breaking the law, but they're professional people who come in to utilize bonuses, are so unbelievably smart that they are forcing operators either to stop all bonusing or to put very strict rules around it. Otherwise, it will literally bankrupt the company. And customers want bonuses. So if customers want bonuses, the only solution is to put rules around them, and they become complex because the bonus abusers are outstandingly brilliant at finding ways around them. Brilliant at it. So it's got more and more complex as time's gone on. So it is a very difficult area, bonus abuse, by the way, and bonuses. It's a very difficult area. Consumer protection is important, but also, I wish bonuses never got invented in the first place, actually, as an operator, as a marketer. They are painful to manage. They upset customers. They peeve them off, and they set more self-exclusion from bonus from getting confused with bonuses than anything else happens. Yet customers demand bonus. If you don't offer them, they'll go somewhere that does. It's a difficult area.
Yeah, and you'd have seen, Peter, that in Ireland, that is one of the kind of the areas in the Act that's been, I suppose, kind of quite controversial in terms of the prohibition on targeted bonuses. Is certainly something that's kind of drawn a lot of attention. And again, that's more focused, I think, on the perception that inducements are, I suppose, they're a consumer risk measure.
But I'll just give you pure practicalities, and we haven't mentioned the word black market the entire call, which is quite unusual for any of us. But if they wanted to be successful, this legislation, and you ban bonuses, guess who's going to come into the market? Just guess. And it's not very hard to get in there with the cryptocurrency now. It's really easy to get in there. And I don't think any regulator gets that bit. They don't understand it. They put rules in like that. And there wasn't no targeted bonus. That means everyone gets 50. You get one sign-up bonus and you get €20 a month, €5 a week. Yippee doodah. Others will be offering much more targeted bonuses, and they'll win the market. And we always talk about percentage of customers. I care about percentage of revenue. I keep on seeing this stuff in the press about only 3% of customers have been stopped for affordability. Yeah, but that's about 80% of the revenue of the business. So that's your risk. That's your regulator's risk. That is where and they'll learn that in about a year's time when the tax revenue is nothing like they thought it'd be, and I can't remember the word they called, but only 50-60% of the market is actually regulated. The rest of the markets have come from the crypto black market, etc., etc. They'll learn the lesson. They'll learn it the hard way.
Yeah.
So unfortunately.
Can I just ask you a question on that, Peter? Just for interested. How does the governments row back from that? Because governments never loosen from regulation or admit they're wrong. So if they get it wrong, how do they row back?
I'm watching Holland very carefully to answer that question. Holland have cocked it up so badly from actually a decent, not perfect regulation, but a decent-ish regulation. I think they had about 85% channelization. Remember the word now. 85-90% channelization. They're now down to 40-50% channelization. Now, any CEO of any company would have been fired for doing that. Yet the regulator in the market and the politicians seem to applaud themselves for doing it. So, well done. It will take something extreme. It will take, for example, clarity that the biggest black market operator in Holland is actually North Korea. I'm making this up, right? It's actually North Korea, or it's actually a big mafia organization in Eastern Europe. It will take something like that to come through that makes it obvious. But to have a black market unit, I think Holland keeps on fining black market companies. Go and try and get the money. UK's got the 65k job. I didn't apply for it, by the way. I could do it by an hour a week, maybe. That's not how you do this stuff, and I think that's the answer. So Holland's with the key one, but they're going to have to roll back because it's not working. And in the old days, it used to be, well, actually, your fiat would stop it because it's quite, you have to be really difficult to. You pay a lot of money to do miscoding. It's difficult to get miscoding, and all the flower shops in Laos, etc., etc. Now with crypto, it is the easiest thing to do to this stuff. So if they don't, they're either going to have 10% of customers punting on regulated and the rest punting on non-regulated, or they're going to roll back. That's going to be the end result. Don't know when that will happen, but that's the end result. And again, it's not about number of customers; it's about value. It's about amount of revenue coming in and tax miss. Imagine a tax miss there.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think we are about out of time, actually, and the idea of governments rolling back on some of the ITO regulations, the impractical regulations, is perhaps a nice place to end, a nice positive place to end if we think it's ever going to happen. But,
Alan, I'm going to give you one challenge, though, if I can.
Yeah.
I would put in the regulation 10% of every marketeer's time in the industry must be spent on education, safer gambling education. And it must be reported that way by every company. Then you'll get some good stuff. The real people who understand how to market think how to market this stuff as well. That would be a great regulation.
You're trying to get yourself a job here as a consultant.
Really not. No, really. I mean, these marketeers in the industry, we've got some of the best marketeers in the entire industry, in the entire world. We really have. Put their heads to this. Wow, they come up with the good answers. Really good answers.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you, Peter. Thank you, Simon. Thank you, Alan. And thank you all for watching. Everyone who's, if you've been watching this, we will send you a little email which will allow you to download the report we've been talking about as well, so you can pick up some more information about that. But in the meantime, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.